Welcome to 23 Degrees Sideways, Coyote in the Highlands. It's another beautiful warm morning. 68 degrees in the shade, but it feels like 100 in the sun already, you know. Shade is life out here. I want to talk about living wages, restaurant work, human interaction, specifically the humanity involved in tipping cultures. And once again, control. Big control factors. So, a Twitter thread started. Someone asked what a normal tipping regime is, because someone said that 25% was a minimum tip, and I'm like, well, I've done this. I've done low-end restaurants. I've done high-end restaurants. I've been a bartender. I've been a volunteer bartender, a paid bartender, a managing bartender. I have, in fact, owned a restaurant-type business. It wasn't really a big restaurant. It was more of a deli. I've been a dishwasher. I've been a line cook. I've been a prep cook. So I have done a lot of this stuff. I've been a busboy, too. That was my first job, was busboy. So I've done a lot of this stuff. And tipping culture is actually a pretty big deal, and I've paid attention to this around the world. I did the restaurants before I joined the Navy. I did restaurants after I joined the Navy, and more bars after I was out of the Navy. Although I did work as a bartender while I was in the Navy as a moonlighting job. So I've got a lot of experience with this, and I've seen this or helped with this or dealt with this in multiple countries. So, in Iceland, there was a restaurant I would go to where I was kind of a default translator. It was a very popular restaurant for Americans coming off the base, and it's a bit of a drive, so it's not like I went there every day or anything. It's not like when I was in Spain. Anyway, in Iceland, and I was the default translator. If I was there, I would get a couple little extra things. It was a Chinese restaurant, which is a very special thing. It was actually American-style Chinese food, so it was a very special thing for the American service member. There's 6,000 people on the base. It's a pretty steady stream when people go to Reykjavik. Again, that's an hour drive. It's not like you go every day or anything, and there's rules and regulations about staying overnight. It was a couple of years. It was a year and a half into my stay in Iceland before I was legally allowed to stay the night out. Didn't stop me, but it's a very interesting black market culture in Iceland. Cigarettes and beer mostly. So all of that, in there, it was a restaurant that got tips. In Iceland, yes, there is a tipping culture. It's also a very humane culture. We'll get back to that a little bit. But I would get some free stuff because I was the default translator. I knew enough Icelandic food words that I could make stuff work for people. Just like cheese, omelet, egg foo young stuff. Like, it doesn't translate as egg foo young. It translates as something else, and all sorts of stuff, In Spain, I actually worked as a bartender off base at a couple different places, volunteer plus tips. That was pretty much how that worked. I did some bartending on base as well in Iceland and in Spain for what you would call barracks parties, or in the case of Spain, not barracks parties, but command parties, special events. So I've done that. I've done the dishwashing thing. I've owned the deli thing. I've done all of this. And this is all a very long-winded way of me saying that I'm a big fan of tipping culture. I've noticed a couple things. People who really hate the idea of tips, Americans, feel that there is a duty and a perspective and a thing about being an employee. We have a big slave mentality view of employee. You are the employee, you do anything I say because I'm the customer. And there's no change in compensation based on that. And that's really bad. We get over that through tipping culture, but people who are against tipping culture have an innate sense of selfishness in terms of the humanity of people they are working with, they are interacting with in a consumer environment. Now, there's different ways to look at this. Salesman culture, any place where someone gets any kind of benefit from having their name on the sale of something, whether it's TV or a car or cell phones or whatever, because there's pay incentives at the cell phone stores and all of that stuff. That's more dishonest. That's a I get paid more if I talk you into something. That's not necessarily I get paid more if I make you happier. See, tipping culture is very healthy that way. The person I ended up in this conversation with called it begging without begging. And that is quite the viewpoint. So as a server, my job in that service environment is to make you have a good time. That's my goal. The better I do that, the better I expect I will get paid. You do that same basic level of effort, which is a very big level of effort for just about anybody. Sometimes you can read people and they want to be left alone and whatever, but this level of effort you put in, you try to be nice to everyone. That's a key thing. Then you have specials, regulars, special people. They're regulars who you've got a couple hundred people. If you work at a restaurant for more than 5 months, say, you've got a couple hundred people, the regulars that you are. Maybe they're not your regulars. Maybe they're somebody else's regulars. But there's just a couple hundred people who are restaurant regulars to the restaurant and the bar, and you know their stuff. You know where they work. You know their wife. You know their girlfriend if they have one. And you're quiet about that. That's how that works. You know their birthday. You know their anniversary. You know their kid's birthday half the time, or their graduation date, depending on age and stuff. And you just memorize this stuff. It's very basic mental stuff. Everyone can do this. Well, the top 80% of people in general can do this. The bottom 20% can be taught to do it. There's skill levels that go with intelligence, whatever. But, it's just a couple hundred people. You remember their stuff. You know what they like. You know how this works. You know if they're on an Atkins program and don't eat bread, so you don't bring the bread out to the table. Just basic stuff. If they're allergic to asparagus or lavender or whatever. Totally basic stuff. But knowing that, being there to make the dinner, the lunch, the bar, a special place and a happier place, that's worth something beyond a government mandate living wage. That's where we're going with this. There's this thing, people who hate tipping culture in the U.S. tend to talk about mandating the living wage, make the owner suck it up. I have been, 2 high-end Italian owner-chef restaurants. The head chef was the owner. One of them worked out really well for many years. One of them went under in about 2.5 years. That's just, it's hard to be an owner chef. It's an 80-hour work week, and you're not making a whole lot of money. You might make enough money to go do something for yourself at sometimes, but you're at the restaurant most of your waking hours, or you're thinking about the restaurant, or you're out shopping for the restaurant, or something. It becomes very definitely your life. So this owner class thing, when it's an individual owner versus a corporate owner, there's a big difference there. Both of these particular high-end restaurants, both were Italian, signature dishes, stuff. Both of them, the owner chef, if you went out to the back of the restaurant and you asked, panhandle, basically, you would get a sandwich or a bowl of spaghetti. You're not going to get veal parmesan unless there's an extra. If there's an extra off-made thing that no one wanted, then yeah, whatever. But basically, spaghetti with meat sauce, or a sandwich or something. Both of these guys did that. Very, very charitable people. And And the servers would do this too. Servers would actually deal with this in a very specific. Servers, restaurant people tend to be the most generous, not just in tipping, but in general, like giving to food banks and other acts of charity. They tend to be very generous people in person, much more so than people who rely on government mandates for charity. I just want to point that out because that's kind of a big deal on this. Government mandate is the other thing about the people who don't like tipping culture, is they talk about government mandates as if the government mandate is going to solve everything. Here's the problem with the government mandate, and I know I'm bouncing back and forth a little bit. I'm trying to not call people who don't like tipping inherently selfish, although there is a selfish aspect to that. They want the employee separation, the slave labor, without having to deal with the fact that someone is serving them, because that's a very uncomfortable thing in a lot of America. Or it's an elitist class thing. And in countries where there is no tipping, I've noticed that there is a much stronger class system, class barrier in terms of restaurants and service and how you consider the people who are doing the service. So that's not a great thing. It's really not a great thing. There's some dehumanization going on there. That tipping culture is a lubricant. It's a social lubricant for people who are willing to give you that level of service to make your life a better thing for a couple hours, a night, a lunch, whatever. It's very personal, but the tipping culture is how we deal with the fact that I'm putting myself so under you and into your needs. You don't need to feel any guilt about it. I get a tip. Like it works. It's not begging without begging. That's what this guy said, begging without begging. He advocates for the living wage. He doesn't like the sub-minimum wage that is the minimum wage for servers, whatever. He doesn't actually like where the minimum wage is, And there are places, there are restaurants where you don't get tips, and it's not a tipping culture, and you work in a mechanized environment. You can go right now down into the valley and make $18 an hour to start at some McDonald's. On the low end, it's $15 an hour. $15 to $18 an hour to work at McDonald's. Whew. As opposed to you're going to get $7 an hour, $8 an hour. I don't know what the current actual minimum wage for that is. I think it's down there. For servers, it might be as low as $5. Working a service job in a restaurant where you get tips, and your tips are probably going to equate to more money than that McDonald's employee if you're not in the, again, bottom 20% of the pile. There are people who just aren't cut out for it, but who are doing it. There are environments where the restaurant is just bad and the tips tend to be bad. There are places where you only get the senior breakfast special and they actually calculate out 11% tip and leave you 78 cents off of their breakfast. And that stuff exists. There are problems in the industry, but see this thing is when you start to mandate that living wage, what you do, speaking of owner chefs, is you take away their ability to have employees. You take away their ability to run the restaurant. You really, really do. Okay? There's nothing about that that's not true. Restaurants tend to run on pretty thin margins in general. You can make it big, you can open a second location, you can do some stuff, but in general, pretty thin margins. So doubling, tripling the labor cost for the employer without having any of that money be business dependent is really a bad idea. It drives individual businesses under. However, it does not drive corporate businesses under. And this is the big thing. The big thing about living wage ideas in a lot of these contexts is that the only people who can afford the ever-increasing bureaucratic paperwork and costs and labor costs are the corporations. So you drive individual business, you drive individual liberty to be business, to own your own means of production. You drive that out. You eliminate that when you go to living wage standards for a lot of this stuff. Now, I've traveled much of the world, okay, 4 continents, 26, 28 something countries. And once again, I have to do the list. I've been a couple places since my jacket. I had a jacket in the military with all of the flags of everything. It was a gidunk jacket, not a uniform jacket. And that had 26 patches on it when I did my last TAD, and there's a couple more since then, so, you know, I got to redo my count. I think it's 28 or 29 now. Anyway, a lot of countries. I spent a lot of time focusing on the food culture, the bartending, the restaurants. In a lot of places, bars and restaurants are the same thing. Like, for example, in Spain, quite often, especially the southern coast and the Atlantic coast, that little southwestern tip. So a lot of these places are individual concerns or family concerns. They're not paying, in a lot of cases, the family members who work there aren't getting paid at all. It's part of the family staying alive and paying its bills. In a lot of cases, for example, bars, especially on the Mediterranean coast, the people working the bar, barmaids, bartenders, depends on where you are, what they're called, are quite often female, sometimes male, young adults who are traveling for a year or two before university, or traveling instead of university, or whatever. So you're generally dealing with people in that 18 to 24 range. Sometimes they're older and they've decided to make this a career. Quite often they work at a bar restaurant for board, for food. They get food, some free drinks, and tips. And they get no pay at all. And they make very decent money. Especially if you get the right bar, you know, tourist season, everything. You're not guaranteed to make 6 figures as a waiter in the U.S., but you can. You absolutely can. You should be doing better than $18 an hour McDonald's wages for your 20-hour work week. Another thing about the service industry is the hours are very variable, but it's often a little more part-time than you think it is. So there's that. But the thing is, if you want that individual liberty, if you want that individual action, if you want people to be able to do their own thing independently, you have to stop these massive government bureaucracy mandates. The mandated living wage, the mandated working conditions, all this stuff that is put in favors corporations. You'll notice that the corporations are involved in these things. When you do get a new set of laws, it favors the corporate interests. They pay for that. You know, it looks good. Oh, we increased minimum wage. No one wants that in the corporate world. But they will work the bill. If it's inevitable, they will work the bill so that it advantages them and disadvantages small business, because small business is where competition comes from. The large corporations, they can go to whatever, Mar-a-Lago, Coronado Golf Course, North Scottsdale golf courses, and they can have their meetings and they can arrange their competitive cutthroat cooperation that basically means no one else can compete. You know, and then they buy each other and they buy each other. Now we have basically 2 grocery store chains in the United States at this point. 3 if you count Costco. You know. Well, no, 4 if you count Walmart. I'm sorry. Yeah, but you've got the Kroger thing. You've got the Safeway, Vons, Albertsons thing. You've got Walmart, you've got Costco. There's no independence left anymore. You know, very few. That's a big deal, something to think about. Regulation favors corporations. Tipping culture lubricates human interaction and doesn't favor corporations as much. There's issues in there. Okay? So stay sideways. And I'll talk more about this in a little bit.